I know. Every cross-stitcher in the world apart from me already uses Pattern Keeper. What can I say? I am way behind the times. But no more! I located this terribly old and slow Android tablet, I've installed the free trial, and I'm ready to give it a whirl. In this video, I'll be sharing my first impressions of Pattern Keeper and then doing a bit more of a deep dive and seeing what we can learn about the various features. Before we get started then, if you're new here, hello! My name is Michelle, aka the Giddy Stitcher. I'm an enthusiastic multi-crafter who likes to combine traditional crafts such as cross-stitch, knitting and crochet with more modern pursuits like 3D printing or adventures with resin. On this channel, I share the ups and downs of multi-crafter life, my first steps in new crafts, and like in today's video, my reviews and experiences of craft-related products. So, if that sounds like the sort of content you might be interested in, you should hang around. Now, I have added chapter markings in the description of this video, so if you have a particular question about Pattern Keeper, you can hopefully skip ahead and find out exactly what it is you're looking for. For the rest of you, well, you should probably just watch the whole thing and see if you agree with my conclusions by the end, okay? Deal. So, first off, for anybody who doesn't know what Pattern Keeper is, it's a custom PDF reader app that promises to turn cross-stitching into a truly zen and relaxing experience. What that means exactly, I can't say quite yet, but it does sound intriguing. The app is currently Android only at the time of recording this video, but apparently there is an Apple version in the works too. In the meantime, a lot of people who usually use Apple products have been going out and buying cheap Android tablets just to run this one app, so that tells me that it must be pretty cool. I'm excited to find out. Pattern Keeper is a paid app with a one-time payment of £7.99 here in the UK, or I believe it's $9 exactly if you're in the US. But it does also have a generous, fully featured 1-month free trial, so you can try it out before you decide whether it's for you. So, one of the things that put me off trying Pattern Keeper until now was hearing that it only really works with a select number of pattern stores. So my plan is to start with an officially supported pattern, see what's what with the basics, and then we'll do a bit of experimentation with some indie patterns and just kind of see what works and what doesn't. You can import from cloud services like Google Drive directly, but I didn't know that and went and downloaded a load of test files prior to recording. So this is a free pattern from a shop that is either called Artsy or Artisy depending on who you ask, and they're on the list of compatible designers for Pattern Keeper, so fingers crossed the import should just work. That seems to be the case, and it's asking me to verify the import. You can view the original PDF by toggling up here, so you can double check that all the symbols imported correctly. That'll be really important to do even if it's a bit of a faff, because imagine doing hundreds or even thousands of stitches in the wrong colour just because you'd skip this step. It does not bear thinking about. For the purposes of this video, we'll just say it's all correct. Alright, so we have a black and white chart and a colour key. So far so good. Let's see what she can do. The 3 icons at the top here let you switch between the 3 different modes: move, search, and markup. On this fresh import, we've defaulted to move mode, and I can move around and zoom in and out exactly as you would expect. The symbols only load in below a certain level of zoom, but that's fine and probably helps a lot with performance on larger patterns. Switching to search mode, you can tap a stitch symbol in the chart and immediately see which colour it represents, which is very nice indeed. In this example, the little 2 symbol corresponds to DMC 310, which of course is black. So it has the colour code and a representation of the actual shade. First pro tip learned just there, make sure you're in move mode before trying to zoom back out or you will lose your selection. Whoops. Okay, this is very cool. I've reselected the black stitches and zoomed out, and you can basically see the outline of the owl. I suppose this view would be most useful after you've completed some stitches, so you can see which you haven't stitched from your colour selection. So let's try markup mode next. In this mode I can tap individual highlighted stitches and then confirm them as stitched with this tick button at the bottom. So far, so straightforward. Doesn't let me select unhighlighted stitches right now, although I expect if nothing was highlighted we'd have free rein to tap around. By long pressing on the symbol instead of tapping it, I can grab all of the black stitches either in this grid square or on the whole page. There's no option to select all of them in the entire pattern, but I guess you would only really need that on a small pattern, which you're probably not using this app for anyway. So fair enough. Now, I've never used the parking method in my cross stitch yet, but it does have support for that. When you select only one symbol, you get this little more option at the bottom, which brings up a choice of parking positions. The little triangle highlight should be a reminder of what's where. Then marking the same stitch complete removes the parking symbol. All makes sense so far. You can of course frog stitches too, just by selecting already completed ones. A button we all hope never to have to use, but it's there if we need it. Here I've selected and marked a couple of colours complete, and when we zoom out you can see that it's actually using the floss colour to mark them off, meaning you'll see the picture fill in full colour as you stitch. That is extremely fun, and I didn't quite realise it at first because I'd happened to select black as my first colour, but never mind. For a final bit of coolness, you might have already noticed these stats along the left side here. Having your percentage complete and your daily stitch count could be very fun for those of us who are a bit too into making graphs. In fact, I bet historical stats is something the developer is probably planning to add one day. Alright, that's it for a quick look at the basics. I am already a little bit sold just because of being able to see the picture fill in bit by bit. I think that's quite exciting. It's not necessarily the most useful feature in the world though. On the other hand, being able to bulk mark off and frog stitches is less exciting, but it is extremely useful. I think so far, to me, the killer feature is one of the more simple ones, and that's just being able to tap on a stitch symbol and see which colour it corresponds to. That will save me so much time scrolling up and down PDFs or having to print out a colour key to sit beside me when I'm stitching. Honestly, this app might be worth it for that feature alone. So now let's get a little bit more advanced and take a look at the settings. You can change how various things display and the colours used, which I'm sure will come in as a useful accessibility feature, or maybe if your pattern involves a lot of green, say you would want to change the search colour. You can turn off the thicker page break lines in the grid, which probably makes it easier to see in some cases, and various other options, including diagonal lines for those who prefer to work that way than in squares. You can also choose to set predefined shortcuts. For example, this one seems like it would drastically reduce the need to keep switching between move and search mode. I'm just going to turn all of these on and give them a whirl. You can choose between functions for double tapping highlighted stitches, but let's go with finish or frog since that's going to be used much more often than parking. Nice, I think I would definitely leave these shortcuts on, but obviously that is personal preference. Okay, so before we move on, I just tried a second pattern from Odyssey, this one being about twice the size, just to see how it handled something bigger. It did take a few more seconds to import, but otherwise worked exactly the same. All good so far. I've also just discovered this menu, which appears when you tap the hamburger icon on a pattern. It looks like you can import and export your progress, which will no doubt be a lifesaver, and I will test that one later. But you can also export the PDF, which I'll test right now. I wanted to see whether this was just a way to recover the original PDF, or whether it had come with your progress marked on it. Turns out it is the latter, although the colours aren't carried over, which is a little bit of a shame. Still, it's better than nothing. Now, so far I am very impressed, but I'm also very aware that these successful tests were with officially supported patterns. Personally, I buy patterns from all kinds of small indie designers, and I kind of get the impression that this app might be less useful for people like me. But we'll give it a go and we will find out. I've loaded up the free pattern Self-Isolating Bat by Night Spirit Studio and will attempt to edit this so I'm not showing off the chart since it's quite a small piece. As you can see, we've got our first error of the day, no grids found in PDF. The explainer text there tells us it's common in PDFs that use images to encode the pattern, which does sound like the approach a lot of small-time designers, including myself, currently use. Uh-oh. You can manually assign where the grids are, but it is probable that the resulting import will not be searchable. Fair enough, let's see what that looks like. First, it wants me to drag this grid until it fits over the actual pattern grid as closely as possible. The edit icon on the left lets you change the grid size to match your pattern, and then it's just a case of zooming in and getting as close to the corners as you can. I'm skipping through this a bit, again just so I'm not showing off the entirety of someone else's pattern. But with that done, we get this familiar screen with the obvious absence of the colour listing on the right and the search mode icon up top. So moving works the same, marking up works the same, but completed stitches will always just have this grey colour, so alas, no pretty picture for this one. You can manually highlight stitches like the search mode usually would, presumably to use as a reference while you stitch, but that seems like a painstaking task on anything but the smallest patterns. I've also discovered a bit of a potential problem. It seems like the app just considers every space in this grid to be a stitch, whether it actually has a symbol in it or not. If I try and highlight all unfinished stitches in this square, for example, you can see it highlights the entire thing and they can be completed as one group. This is a problem if you do it by accident, because as far as I know, there's no undo button. You would need to completely clear this square of stitches and then remark off as needed. Presumably treating the whole grid as stitches makes the stats on the left inaccurate too, which is a shame, but it can't really be avoided. Next up, I tried a Satsuma Street pattern which had the same no grids found issue. Again, you could go through the process of manually adding the grids and mark everything off in grey. It's probably not worth the effort for me personally, but you do you. And lastly, I couldn't resist trying one of my own patterns, but yep, no surprise there. Same issue again. So let's move on. If you've watched any of my other videos, you might know I've been working on the Pixels That Made Us Stitch Along by PixStitch, which is a very large and confetti-filled pattern by my usual standards. I want to try importing this one because I've heard from others stitching it that they did manage to get it working in Pattern Keeper, but just had to manually add the colours. That's no joke though, since this pattern involves around 200 colours, but it could potentially still be worth it just because of all that confetti. Each letter in the pattern was released in multiple parts, and each release had 2 versions. I've been working from the single page versions, but there was also a version with the chart split up over multiple pages. All of that means there are a few different file layouts to experiment with. Let's see what's what. I'll start big, because if this one works then the rest are moot. This is the single page master release file. We have a totally different error this time. In this case, it looks like it's because these files include both a black and white and a colour version of the chart, and Pattern Keeper only wants one. So let's remove the colour chart and see what it can do with the black and white. Now, you can immediately see this has not worked. It seems like it's only picked up 6 of the chart symbols for some reason, but let's push forward and see what it generates for us. We'll just choose the Set Everything to Grey option for now. Okay, that was pretty satisfying to watch. Behold, a new problem. This chart appears to be sideways, and I'm pretty sure I didn't miss a rotation option anywhere, so not really sure what's going on there. In search mode, it is detecting the correct placement by the looks of it, but when I zoom back in, yeah, that doesn't match at all. I knew this file was a bit of a long shot with so much detail on one page, so maybe a smaller individual release file will work better. Update. No, it did not. I tried the first release of letter A, again the single page version of it, and again it struggled to detect symbols and it rotated the chart sideways. It seems safe to say the single page variants of this pattern are no good. So let's try the same release, part 1 of the A, but in multiple pages. I needed to remove the colour charts and leave only the black and white for it to work with, but that takes literal seconds, so no worries there. This is new, it can automatically tell that the charts have a shaded overlap section. Pretty cool. A 2-row overlap, there you go, do your thing. Tentatively speaking, it looks like the symbols may have imported this time around. Let's set everything to grey as per and go have a look. And yes! The chart is the right way up. Searching seems to work fine too. So all this one is missing is the fancy colours. That's not too shabby. So let's head back to the main screen and see what we can do about the colour situation. There's an edit legend option in here which takes us back to the screen you see on initial import. First you'll need to be in PDF mode so you can actually see the colour key in the original file, and then tapping on any of the blank colour keys over at the side here, it pops up a window. The legend isn't in the same order as in the pattern. I suspect it's just in the order the symbols were encountered during import, but I can see that the first one in the list corresponds to DMC 720, so let's put that one in. Typing in the number alone doesn't change anything. You need to select this icon here and then choose a brand. The colour preview should then update. Alright, now just to do this another 200 plus times. Yeah, that's not happening. I've done orange and black as a test and we can extrapolate from there. The preview has now updated with our new colours, which is very nice. It does almost make me want to go back and add them all, but not quite. Apparently, the manually added colours moved to the bottom of the legend, which did confuse me for a second, but you can see now they can be searched and worked with exactly the same way as we did in the officially supported Artisy patterns. That'll do, pig, that'll do. Okay, so I think it's fair to say we've seen a range of results there. Some patterns work out of the box, some require a little bit of manual setup, and others have only the barest of functionality. I do just want to say I'm absolutely sure that the developer is working as hard as she possibly can on extending the compatibility. I know there is a long backlog of pattern shops that people have requested compatibility for, and I do not envy her this task. Out of curiosity though, I loaded up the PDFs that we've been testing into Acrobat Reader just to see if I could spot any differences between them that might signal why some of them work in Pattern Keeper and some of them don't. The Artisy pattern that worked flawlessly uses some kind of symbol font to create the pattern grid. You can see here it's possible to highlight individual stitches as text. The pick stitch cell, on the other hand, doesn't appear to be using text, but the stitches are still able to be highlighted individually. The patterns that didn't work at all by comparison have a chart, or in some cases a whole layout, that is just literally one big image and can only be selected all at once. So I don't know much about the ins and outs of formatting PDFs from a code standpoint, but it does seem obvious that there's a big difference in how these files are put together. In fact, you might be able to tell which patterns will work with Pattern Keeper just by doing this quick test and seeing if you can select the pattern symbols as text. Of course, you know what they say about correlation, so I might be on completely the wrong track there and that might not work at all. A more recent experimental feature of the app is the ability to import paper patterns by taking a photo. Unfortunately, the only paper pattern I own is quite large and creased, so this might not be the best test. But I've taken a photo and we'll give it a go. I tried to make sure the photo was oriented as straight as possible, but let's see how I did. I need to add my own grid here with a custom size and then painstakingly attempt to line it up as close as possible to the original. In theory, if the corners are all positioned correctly, then it should all be good, but I am a bit skeptical. Yeah, okay, there are some issues it's highlighted for me, and even in the green sections I can see that everything doesn't line up. In total fairness here, this seems like an issue caused by the fold lines in the paper, so smoothing that out ahead of time would in theory also make for a smoother import. I've got it as close as I can, but Now we have a colour correction slider. One side brings up the white and one reduces the noise of the darker colours, so the goal is to get it as crisp as can be. Quality of the original photo will play a big part here, and I expect natural lighting is kind of a must. Alright, well, that's a fail. But to be fair, it really does seem to be a problem with the folds in the paper rather than the app itself. I'm actually quite impressed at how much detail it pulled out of a zoomed out photo of quite a large bit of paper. I can't complain, honestly. If you do go this route, I think maybe just try and iron any creases out of your pattern, and if it is a large pattern like mine, you might be better off taking multiple photos and importing them as separate pages. For an experimental feature though, this has a ton of potential. My one remaining question is how the export and import system works. Obviously, it'd be good to take regular backups of larger projects and store them on a service like Google Drive or Dropbox. But what do you actually get when you re-import? I've exported progress on our working pick stitch file, the one with the black and orange assigned, and I've deleted and then re-imported the file as a blank project to represent moving to a new device. Now let's see what happens when I import the progress. Oh no, that's a bit disappointing. You can see the completed stitches are all coloured grey, but my manually added colours are lost. This was orange and this was black. They do still function correctly, but just don't have their colour assigned. That seems like something that should be on a roadmap for adding to the export at some point, and it may already be, but in an absolute emergency on a big project, you'd probably still be glad just to have your progress marked off. So it's certainly better than nothing. As a final note, one thing you might notice that I haven't talked about yet is the situation around technical support. As far as I can gather, the best way to get quick help is through the Facebook group. However, my application to the group has not been approved just yet, so I can't speak to that. I do know there is also a support email address, although I've seen reports of quite long waits. So it's probably not a deal breaker to anyone, but just something to bear in mind if you are a person who does not have a Facebook account, you might struggle to get quick assistance if you have a problem. Alright, I think that just about covers all the questions that I had about Pattern Keeper, and hopefully the ones that you had too. If there is something else you're curious about that I didn't cover in this video, leave me a comment and I will totally try and find out the answer to that for you. This was definitely interesting, and I could immediately see why people love this app so much. Though I have to admit, it seems like the sort of thing that I might not bother with quite yet unless I was taking on a big full coverage pattern from one of the big supported shops. Importing the image-based patterns and manually marking them up just doesn't seem particularly worth it to me, personally. And anything in between where you need to manually set up the colours, I'd probably take that on a case-by-case basis. On the other hand, it is only £8, so I might end up buying it anyway just to support development. Why not, right? I think the biggest immediate improvement that the developer could make to this app is adding the colour legend to project export. As we've seen, if you spend a long time manually entering the colours and then need to back up and re-import your project, you lose all of that hard work, which seems like a real shame. I also think that could help take some of the pressure off in terms of having to expand compatibility to different shops. If one person is able to set up the colours, export the project, and send the blank progress file to other people working on the same pattern in, say, a stitch-along situation, then a lot more people will be able to use Pattern Keeper with that pattern that they wouldn't otherwise have bothered manually entering the colours for. Anything that reduces pressure on the dev is probably a really good thing if you see the size of the request Trello board. So, what's the final conclusion? I think if you are stitching full coverage patterns from a supported shop, this app is an absolute no-brainer and you would be crazy not to use it. On the other hand, if you mostly stitch from small indie PDFs, it might not have much more value than your generic PDF editing app. Yet. So there we have it, my in-depth Pattern Keeper review. If you made it to the end, wow, you either had a lot of very specific questions about Pattern Keeper or you are extremely supportive, and either way, I like you a lot, I'm very grateful. We are actually going away and staying in a hotel for part of next week, for the first time in what feels like literally years. But don't worry, there will still be a video on Friday as planned, and I have to admit, I'm a little bit nervous, but kind of excited about this one. Remember to drop this video a like if you liked it, a comment if you don't want me to spiral into despair, and maybe even a subscribe if you were new here. Thanks. I appreciate you. That's it. Have a brilliant rest of your day. I'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep making cool stuff.